The aircraft's versatility soon became apparent. Night intruder operations saw Mosquitoes hunting German night fighters over their own airfields, disrupting the Luftwaffe's defensive operations at a critical period of the bombing campaign. In the photo reconnaissance role, its speed and ceiling, it could operate comfortably above 35,000 feet in later variants, made it virtually immune to interception. The Pathfinder squadrons of No. 8 Group employed it as a target marker. Its speed and precision navigation, allowing it to arrive ahead of the main bomber stream and illuminate the aiming points with colored flares. The raids on Berlin that so perplexed the German defenders were a particular source of Luftwaffe embarrassment. Between January and March 1943, Mosquitoes of No. 105 and No. 139 squadrons conducted a series of high-speed nuisance raids on the German capital. The raids caused relatively modest material damage, but that was never entirely the point. They forced the population of Berlin into the shelters repeatedly, disrupted war production, and demonstrated to Hitler and his senior commanders that even the heart of the Reich was not safe. Hermann Göring, whose assurances that no enemy aircraft would ever reach Berlin were already looking threadbare, reportedly became so incensed by the Mosquito that he described it as one of the most infuriating aircraft of the war. The exact words he used have been reported in various forms, and historians are rightly cautious about attributing precise quotes to informal remarks. But the essential point, that the Mosquito drove Luftwaffe planners to a kind of helpless fury, is well documented. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Germany's response to the Mosquito problem is instructive, not least because it reveals how difficult the aircraft was to counter even when you knew it was coming. The Focke-Wulf 190D, the high-altitude interceptor variant introduced in 1944, could reach comparable speeds at certain altitudes, and it did account for a number of Mosquito losses. But catching a Mosquito that was already at operational altitude and traveling at full speed required a scramble response, so rapid and a climb rate so extreme that it was achievable only in ideal conditions. The Mosquito, unlike most aircraft, could often simply accelerate away. German engineers, studying intelligence reports and the occasional wreck recovered from crash sites, were repeatedly confused by the wooden construction. The assumption in Luftwaffe technical circles was that such a machine must have some fundamental structural weakness. That speed achieved through unconventional materials must come at a cost in strength or reliability. This assumption was wrong. The laminated wooden structure of the Mosquito was, in certain respects, stronger than metal construction of equivalent weight, particularly in resisting certain types of combat damage. Small caliber rounds sometimes pass straight through the wooden skin without causing the kind of catastrophic structural failure they would have produced in stressed metal airframes. The Americans, for their part, initially viewed the Mosquito with the slight skepticism that characterizes any nation's first encounter with another country's military technology. The USAAF evaluated the aircraft in 1942 and found its performance genuinely impressive. Though the single-purpose nature of each variant, there was no straightforward American equivalent that combined the bomber, fighter-bomber, night fighter, and reconnaissance roles in one airframe, made it difficult to integrate into American procurement thinking. Some American units operating from British bases did eventually fly Mosquitoes on specific missions, and a Canadian production line at Downsview, Ontario, produced variants adapted for North American service. No German aircraft achieved quite what the Mosquito achieved. The Junkers Ju-88, which was Germany's most versatile twin-engine design, was a capable aircraft across multiple roles, but it was slower and more vulnerable than its British counterpart. The Heinkel He-219 night fighter was fast and formidable, but arrived late and was produced in small numbers. The Dornier Dow 335, with its remarkable push-pull engine layout and extraordinary speed, never reached operational service in meaningful quantities before the war ended. In raw performance terms, no Luftwaffe design ever matched the Mosquito across the full range of what that aircraft could do. The Mosquito's actual impact on the outcome of the Second World War is a question that historians continue to assess with some care. In purely material terms, bombs dropped, targets destroyed, enemy aircraft shot down. Its contribution was significant but not dominant. Bomber Command's main offensive was conducted by the heavy four-engine bombers, the Lancaster, the Halifax, the Sterling. The Mosquito was fast and precise, but carried a comparatively modest bomb load. Even in its bomber variants, it could deliver around 4,000 pounds of ordnance, compared to the Lancaster's maximum of 22,000 pounds. But to judge the Mosquito only by bomb load is to misunderstand what made it exceptional. Its real contribution was operational flexibility and the psychological and tactical disruption it created. The Berlin nuisance raids, the low-level precision attacks against Gestapo headquarters in occupied Europe, including the famous 1944 strike on Aarhus University in Denmark, which destroyed Gestapo records and killed a significant number of German intelligence personnel. The night intruder operations, the photo reconnaissance missions that mapped the German war machine from above. All of these reflected the Mosquito's capacity to do things that no other aircraft could do in quite the same way. Exactly 7,781 Mosquitoes were built between 1941 and 1950, across 33 variants. The operational loss rate, at roughly 254 aircraft per 100,000 sorties, was among the lowest of any aircraft type used by Bomber Command, a figure that speaks directly to the effectiveness of its fundamental philosophy. Speed, it turned out, really was the best defense. Surviving examples can be seen today at several locations. The de Havilland Aircraft Museum at Salisbury Hall, the very site where the prototype was built, holds both the original prototype and a later production aircraft. The Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario, operates an airworthy example, one of only two in the world that can still fly. Watching it take off, even knowing what it is and how it works, produces something close to disbelief at the sound and the speed of it. Return, then, to that morning over Berlin. The air raid wardens looking up, the telephone exchanges lighting up. The German pilots who scrambled and found nothing. What they were unable to intercept was not a wonder weapon in the sense that the V-2 rocket or the jet-powered ME-262 was a wonder weapon, something that required a technological leap that bordered on the visionary. What they were unable to intercept was, in a very real sense, a piece of furniture, a box of wood, laminated and sanded and shaped by craftsmen who had spent their careers making chairs and violins and writing desks, now cruising at nearly 400 miles per hour at 25,000 feet above the German capital, with not a single defensive gun on board and every reason in the world to be confident. The genius of the Mosquito was not in any single innovation. There was no secret ingredient, no classified technology, no exotic alloy or revolutionary engine. The genius was in the decision, taken against institutional resistance, against procurement logic, against what everyone sensible agreed was possible, to trust a principle. If you build something light enough, and smooth enough, and powerful enough, it will be faster than whatever is sent to catch it. Bishop and de Havilland were right about that. They were right in a way that extended beyond their own calculations, because the smoothness of that wooden skin provided a margin of performance that even they had not fully quantified. The Luftwaffe never figured out why it was quite so fast. In certain respects, the full aerodynamic explanation would only be pieced together in the post-war years, as boundary layer research and laminar flow theory advanced to the point where the advantage of that finished wooden surface could be properly characterized. Germany built magnificent aircraft. The engineers who produced the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt 262 were among the finest aeronautical minds of their generation. And yet, throughout the war, they could not solve the mosquito problem. They could not build something that caught it reliably, could not understand fully why catching it was so difficult, and could not replicate the philosophy that had produced it. Because that philosophy required not just engineering skill, but the particular willingness to back an unconventional idea against all received wisdom. The mosquito outlasted the war, serving in British and Commonwealth service into the 1950s. Its basic concept so sound that even jet-age designers found it difficult to immediately supersede. In Denmark and in Norway, in China and in Yugoslavia, in dozens of air forces across the world, it flew on long after the conflict that had created it was resolved. 33 variants, 7,781 aircraft, built largely by furniture makers, never caught when it did not want to be caught, made of wood, faster than everything they sent against it, and for years, blissfully, infuriatingly, they never quite worked out why. The British wooden plane that flew faster than every German fighter, and they never figured out why. It is the 30th September 1943, and somewhere over the rooftops of Berlin, a sound is doing something extraordinary. It is not the thundering rumble of a Lancaster's 4 Merlin engines, nor the distant drone of a formation climbing through cloud. It is something else entirely. A high, urgent scream, rising and then gone, like a stone skipped across still water. By the time the air raid wardens on the ground have even turned their heads, whatever made that sound has already vanished. In the operations rooms of the Luftwaffe, telephone exchanges light up with frantic reports. Pilots scramble, engines cough to life. And then, almost as quickly as the commotion begins, it ends. Nothing is caught, nothing is shot down. And the target, a precision facility in the heart of the German capital, is burning. The men trying to intercept that aircraft are flying some of the finest aeroplanes ever built. Their Focke-Wulf 19s and Messerschmitt 19s represent the very pinnacle of German engineering, refined through years of combat, upgraded with every lesson the war has provided. And yet, impossibly, they cannot reach whatever has just passed over their city. They cannot close the gap. By the time they reach altitude, the intruder is already gone, dwindling to nothing in the pale eastern sky. What has done this to them is made of wood, birch plywood, balsa, and spruce. It carries no defensive armament whatsoever. No gun turrets, no tail gunners, no waist positions. It relies on a principle so audacious that when the men who designed it first proposed it, they were told flatly that it could not be done and that they were wasting everyone's time. This is the story of the de Havilland Mosquito, a machine born from a rejected proposal, built by furniture makers and piano manufacturers, and dismissed by military planners who should have known better. It would go on to become the most versatile combat aircraft of the Second World War, capable of flying higher and faster than virtually anything the Luftwaffe could put in the air against it. It would baffle German intelligence for years. And the reason it was so extraordinarily fast, the real reason, rooted in aerodynamics and material science, was something that even the British designers who built it did not fully understand at the time. To grasp why the Mosquito was so remarkable, you must first understand what the Royal Air Force believed it needed in 1938 and what it was willing to consider in order to get it. Britain watching events on the continent with mounting alarm, was in the middle of a frantic expansion of its military aviation. Factories were being retooled, designs accelerated, procurement decisions made with an urgency that left little room for imagination. The emphasis, understandably, was on what had already worked. Heavy bombers with multiple crew and defensive armament. Fighters with proven performance. The thinking was conventional, and in the circumstances, that was entirely rational. Into this environment stepped Geoffrey de Havilland, a man who had spent his entire career pushing aircraft design in directions that others had not yet considered. His company, based at Hatfield in Hertfordshire, had already produced some of the most commercially successful aircraft of the interwar period, including the elegant Moth series that had taught thousands of private pilots to fly. But what de Havilland and his chief designer, Ronald Bishop, were now contemplating was something of a different order altogether. Their proposal, submitted to the Air Ministry in the autumn of 1938, described an unarmed twin-engine bomber built almost entirely from wood. It would carry a crew of 2. It would have no gun positions. Its defense against interception would be pure, unadorned speed. The calculations suggested it could reach 400 miles per hour, faster than any fighter then in service anywhere in the world. The Air Ministry, reading this proposal in a climate of urgent practicality, rejected it. They needed bombers that could defend themselves, not theoretical machines that might, in theory, be too fast to catch. De Havilland persisted. He offered to build the prototype at his own expense, using his own workforce without drawing on the government resources that were already stretched so thin. Eventually, and with considerable reluctance, the Air Ministry issued specification B.1/40, and the work began in earnest at Salisbury Hall, a moated manor house near London Colney in Hertfordshire, a site chosen precisely because it was remote and easily concealed. The reasoning behind the wooden construction was not merely romantic attachment to traditional materials. It was cold, practical logic. The war had created immediate and severe shortages of light alloys. Aluminium in particular was desperately scarce, committed to the production of Spitfires, Hurricane, and the growing fleet of bombers. Wood, by contrast, was abundant. More importantly, the skilled workforce to work with it was equally abundant. Cabinet makers, furniture manufacturers, boat builders, piano craftsmen. All of these trades were represented across Britain, and all of them possessed exactly the skills needed to shape, bond, and laminate the birch plywood that would form the Mosquito's revolutionary structure. The fuselage of the Mosquito was constructed using a method that would have seemed peculiar to anyone trained in the conventional aircraft manufacture. It was built in 2 longitudinal halves, each one formed by pressing sheets of birch plywood over a balsa wood core in a shaped mould, with the whole assembly bonded together using aerolite, a casein-based adhesive derived from milk protein. The 2 completed shells were then joined along the centerline with additional reinforcement and internal fittings installed. The result was a structure of extraordinary rigidity and smooth external finish, and that finish was crucial. Ronald Bishop and his team understood instinctively, if not yet in the precise mathematical language that post-war aerodynamics would provide, that surface quality mattered enormously at high speed. Metal aircraft of the period were assembled from riveted panels, and every rivet head, however carefully flush-fitted, represented a tiny disruption to the airflow. Wooden construction, laminated and sanded to a mirror finish, produced a surface that simply had no equivalent in metal construction techniques of the time. The skin was almost perfectly smooth. The airflow over it was, in aerodynamic terms, dramatically more laminar than over any comparable metal aircraft. This is the answer to the question that puzzled German intelligence throughout the war, and which even the Mosquito's own designers only partially understood. The aircraft's extraordinary speed, it would eventually be clocked at 437 miles per hour at operational altitude in later marks, was not explained entirely by its engines or its aerodynamic shape, impressive as both were. A significant portion of its speed advantage came from the smoothness of its wooden skin. At the velocities the Mosquito was achieving, even small reductions in skin friction, drag translated into dramatic improvements in performance. The wood gave it an invisible edge that no one had calculated precisely, and no one in Germany ever quite identified. The two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines that powered the production variants were themselves remarkable pieces of machinery. Each one produced, depending on the mark, between 1,250 and 1,700 horsepower. Mounted on the wooden wing, itself a single-piece laminated structure of exceptional strength. They drove three-bladed de Havilland hydromatic propellers capable of constant speed adjustment. The combination of that much power and that little aerodynamic resistance produced performance figures that were, by the standards of 1941 and 1942, simply astonishing. Production was distributed across an unlikely network of subcontractors. Furniture manufacturers in High Wycombe, a town long associated with chair-making, produced components. Violin makers contributed their expertise in thin wood lamination. The London firm of E. Gomm, better known for its domestic furniture, found itself manufacturing aircraft parts. At Hatfield itself, and later at shadow factories in Leavesden, Chester and Belfast, final assembly brought these components together into a finished aircraft that weighed, in its bomber variant, roughly 23,000 pounds fully loaded, less than half the weight of a Lancaster. The Mosquito entered operational service with No. 2 Group of Bomber Command in May 1942, and its initial deployment immediately demonstrated both its capabilities and the frustration it caused for the men operating it. The aircraft was genuinely unlike anything else in the RAF's inventory, and the tactics for using it had to be invented almost from scratch. The first operational sorties were daylight raids against targets in occupied Europe, flown at low level and relying entirely on speed and evasion rather than escort or defensive armament. On 31st May 1942, 4 Mosquitoes were sent to attack Cologne in the aftermath of the famous 1,000-bomber raid, flying in at rooftop height in broad daylight. 3 returned safely. The one that was lost was the victim of a flak burst, not an enemy fighter, a distinction that mattered enormously to the men doing the planning.